Welcome to the Salience Podcast, where we identify what stands out from all the noise.
Today on the Salience Podcast, we explore the impact of culture on safety. Our guest is Jeff Mongomery. Jeff has a distinguished career as a US Navy pilot with 30 years leadership, team building and management experience in aviation. He completed 5 active deployments involving combat in the Middle East and is just transitioning from being a test pilot to flying for a medical life flight organisation. In addition to a career in aviation, Jeff is a passionate backcountry skier and he teaches and presents on avalanche safety. What grabbed my attention in Jeff's avalanche teachings was his integration of people factors, awareness of context, and decision making. Much of Jeff's career and recreational time is spent in complex, high-risk settings, and it's these experiences I want to explore today with Jeff. In particular, I want to explore the impact of culture and team dynamics on safety through the lens of aviation and backcountry skiing. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Ian. Looking forward to the discussion.
Well, to kick off, I'd like to know a little bit more about your own journey, long before you were a pilot. What early experiences helped shape your thinking and approach today?
The early experiences for me that I think helped shape me in some of the subconscious ways, as well as conscious, were being raised by my mother. Having those perspectives, learning from her in that way, as a single parent, way I was raised, and she was an incredibly hard worker, and she was starting her own business. So when I was growing up and her business was just getting started, I got to watch her go through that process from working inside of our living room to ultimately owning her own building and being very successful. Her business was graphic design and art, and that definitely instilled a lot of work ethic that I've taken forward into trying to use myself to succeed. And I also had a chance to see her, not always directly, but sometimes indirectly, the struggles that she perhaps dealt with as a woman professional. And I also think that being raised by my mother has made me a little bit more of a sensitive person at times, maybe sometimes overly sensitive. That has been both a strength and a weakness for me in a professional environment.
Yeah, when we interview people around resilience, we go to people like yourself, military careers, frontline experience, and then we talk to everyday people, single parents, bringing up children with lived experiences or disabilities, and there's some remarkable stories of resilience there. Love, compassion, pushing on through adversity. And there's a lot of inspiration, I think, in that, particularly around parenting. I think very, very challenging whilst you're trying to handle a new company, a startup, and as you say, going from working in the living room to owning our own building. Yes, it's an inspirational story. And interestingly, you picked up two attributes there, the hard work ethic and the sensitivity and awareness of what was involved for her in that. And you said sometimes that you might overplay that. Tell me more about that. What kind of things might you do where you think, maybe I'm being too sensitive here in the environment that I'm in? What's happened?
Oversensitivity in a naval aviation culture can be not the best thing to have sometimes, because you're in a very competitive culture. It's very male dominated. There's a lot of very direct debriefing and feedback all the time. So to be overly sensitive to feedback or other people's inputs, or thinking that it's personal when it's not, has been something I've really had to work on in that professional environment, and outside of that environment as well. So I think it can be a very strong attribute because it can make you more aware of what other people around you are feeling, and also trying to be sensitive to what may offend them or make them feel unrespected, less respected. But if you don't moderate that within yourself, it definitely can roll back on you. And I remember an experience right when I first started Officer Candidate School, and I had failed a test and was being stood up in front of our drill instructor and the chief petty officer, and they were just kind of grilling me. It's the way that it's what they're supposed to do. It's part of the indoctrination into that work environment, and getting very upset about it and having to work and recognize in that moment that this is something I'm going to need to control better for the rest of my career.
This is really getting to the heart of what I want to unpack. And it's about culture, it's about safety, it's about feedback systems. And there's a few lines I want to explore here. One of the fundamentals that we teach is that the signals in the body that we often call emotions are often telling us something about the environment. It's often protective, and sometimes the signals for risk or safety are felt sensations. It's not logical yet. We don't really know. Tell me about when you've got felt sensations, or people have got the sort of touchy-feely in a military environment where there's really quite, as you put it, a very direct approach to debrief and feedback. Can that really direct approach sometimes push critical information under the table? Can it make it so that people are not speaking up?
I'd like to start by going back to your highlight of your feelings. What I would reference as your gut, or something that you can't perceive directly, but is definitely in your conscience, giving you guidance. And that is perhaps one of the most important tools that I used, both in managing safety and a culture of safety, as well as in leadership. Trust your gut. Talked to a really good friend that is a professional in safety, and he's got this great story about being really uncomfortable the entire time on a climb and not really understanding why. And they were kind of on this feature where they could not see what was down valley from them, but feeling panicked the entire time. And when they got to the top, they realized they could finally see down valley, and there was this wall of thunderstorms approaching them that they couldn't see prior to getting that into view. So that's a very direct example about perhaps something that you can feel in the pressure of weather changes or something. But I really have a strong belief in this term we call using your gut to help guide you. And how that relates to critical feedback, yes, absolutely. You can get lost in trying to bring up the errors that occurred in an event and not spend enough time focusing on the things that went well in an effort to try and point out what you shouldn't do again. And that can start to just create an environment that's not enjoyable for the debrief. By not taking time to also bring out the positives, you just create a space where someone doesn't want to come back to that again. Because in these events that we would fly a lot of times, more so in training perhaps than in an actual combat evolution, there's mission planning for 6 hours, let's say, and or maybe even 2 days. And then you go out and fly for 2 hours or an hour and 30 minutes. And then you come back and you debrief for another 2 hours, sometimes 4 hours. And if you don't know how to work some good times into that, and it's all about direct feedback on what you perhaps didn't do well, you're not going to really inspire someone to want to come back into it again.
Mm. There's a couple of points I want to pick up there. One, I think that the gut instinct is both a very common metaphor, and for many people, their signal is in the gut. A lot of people we work with, though, it's somewhere else. It can be tingles up the back of the spine. It can be a sensation in the big toe. It could be images. It could be sounds. So my one caution there is to be alert to somebody who might be describing a different sensation or a different sense with safety, with a signal. My second follow-up, I absolutely agree that really focusing on what's working well so we can keep doing that. Sometimes people get in a circle where they're constantly trying to find and chase the tail of improvement, but they forget to keep doing what's working well. And as you say, that's the inspiration. That's the bit. Hey, look, we nailed this. We did. We're all back home safely. We did this really well. Now, what can we do to improve? And I have a really simple phrase: is there anything we can do more of or less of? And it's quite a non-threatening way to do that debrief. And And I always go to individuals first. I always say, rather than, if I've got an opinion about what they could do to improve, I park that. Don't say anything. Ask the question, what could you do to improve? Anything you could do more of or less of? And almost always, people will be harder on themselves than you ever will as a leader, as a team leader. They'll go, I could have done this, I could have done that, I could have done the following. You go, yeah. Remember you did a great job. And yes, all of those things are amazing. And most of the time, you don't have to ever say what it is that you've noticed.
Agreed. Yeah. And right now I see that sometimes in parenting for me, with my boy, trying to make sure I bring that same positiveness into being a father and not always calling him out for what he's done wrong.
Yeah. There's so many parallels, isn't there, from what you can learn professionally and recreationally and then into parenting.
Absolutely.
Getting back to this really quite subtle art of giving and receiving high quality feedback that maintains safety, maintains the passion, the encouragement, and at the same time has that critical need for improvement. What have you seen or heard that's really helped that along? What are the very best people you've ever had a debrief from? What did they do? How did they do it?
Well, the best people that I've worked with or seen in that environment are the ones that are the most willing to not only call themselves out for the things that they have done wrong, but to somehow do that in an upbeat, sort of friendly way. There was a woman I worked with for a while in Fallon, Nevada, and she's probably one of the best Navy pilots I've ever been around. And she was just this really incredible personality who was very good at what she did and was also very good at highlighting mistakes that she made, but not being like downtrodden about it. And it kind of would be able to then roll that same approach into highlighting the mistakes that you made, or when she had to debrief you on those critical points as well. I think if that's answering your question, it's being able to call yourself out openly and not feel the need to not discuss that mistake because somehow you feel like that will reduce your credibility.
Yeah, there's several things that are happening there. She's changing the power imbalance. It's not a me as the expert reviewing you. It's we're all reviewing each other. We're one team. So she's broken down the power dynamic. Then she's role modeling. She's role modeling what she wants to see. With great humility. Here's what I did well. Here's how I could improve. And she's leading from the front, saying, "This is how I want it. I'm not judging you. We're just here to learn." Beautiful patterning, I think. Have you going to the opposite end of the spectrum? In your career, you must have had some pretty shocking debriefs or experiences of seeing or hearing feedback that you think, wow, that's not working. That's really unhelpful. Have you seen behaviors that are the opposite of what you've just described?
Yes, for sure. And I know sometimes in the past that has been me. I've made some of the mistakes that I think are weak points in debriefing well or being able to call yourself out openly. What I have had the most opportunity, or where I've had the most opportunity to see poor feedback, has been over the past 6 years when I've exited the Navy, because I no longer walk into the room as an officer with rank on my shoulder, or just with wings on my chest as your warfare designator. I'm just a guy walking into a room. And it's been really interesting to see how people treat you when they don't have to treat you well because of a status. I have experienced that, and the worst example I have for you is where I felt like a supervisor was being a bit, I'll just say, over the top on some critical feedback to other team members in a situation. I tried to bring that to them, and I was told that, sometimes people just need to shut up and do their job. And this was a senior leader, civilian leader, and was just floored by that response. That was, I was basically being told to go away at that point. People just need to shut up and do their job. And that's probably the worst example that comes to mind immediately. I definitely have seen some other examples of that in On the military side, we call it a screamer. Someone's yelling, rolling a lot of emotion into their feedback. It's definitely a negative thing when it's negative emotion, anger, frustration.
Yeah, it's reminded me of something I used to do when I worked in government. I was involved in the selection of many, many people over a number of years. And I used to have an extended interview process. There was the formal part of the interview and people knew that they were being interviewed. But I would set them up to have interactions with staff on the front desk or young students, people with no formal status or authority. And I would then go and interview them about their experience with the interviewee. How did you find that person when they came into you? Were they polite? Were they respectful? Were they curious? Did they ask questions? Did they say, hi, how's your day? What did you get? Oh, my word. Sometimes you'd have people who'd say, yeah, we've met 5 candidates. This candidate said this. And just shocking examples of rudeness where there's no status involved, and immediately go, not hire. Thanks for coming.
Right.
So I think there's a lot that we can learn about people when there's no advantage to them in the room to suck up to status. I think that's doesn't that tell you a lot about your culture?
It does.
I like this concept as well, the metaphor of the screamers. Such a poor way of fostering that feedback and hey, just shut up. Sometimes you just need to get on with your job. What does that do for safety when people are doing that? What are the consequences?
They're horribly negative. You shut down communication and you eliminate a person's ability to speak up when they need to. Again, I didn't always do things perfectly. I try to do my best in setting examples and trying to create the environment that I thought was best. But I remember my last tour in the Navy, I was the senior guy in the squadron, and I would check in every new young enlisted, typically the youngest would be the young enlisted, when I say typically, and talk to them about their role in the squadron. And, some of these young men and women were born after I got into the Navy. So they were quite a bit younger than me. And I tried to always highlight to them the importance of the expectation that they would speak up. And what I would focus on there was the evolutions that they would be involved in, specifically in the maintenance side, especially if that was on the flight deck. But even in just a routine maintenance operation, and I would tell them, look, you're the young eyes, you're the fresh set eyes coming in here. You may not know as much as the other people around you, but you're also the newest to the environment. And you're perhaps the one most likely to see a variance that the rest of us don't, because we've kind of got this fixed way of going through the process. And we need you and expect you to speak up. That's part of your role in this evolution. And you might be the person that makes that difference, in a life-saving difference if you go to one extreme. So that was a way that I would try to do that, Ian. Yeah,
absolutely. Permissioning the feedback, acknowledging that novelty, that they might be scanning to novelty, that comes across, or circumvents this issue we have around inattentional blindness. This way that experts see the patterns that we expect to see, and we become blind to novelty because we're used to seeing it over and over again. I like that. Bringing in a new generation increases diversity, of course. As you've been talking, I've been reminded of some work we've done with a couple of different frontline agencies, military, paramilitary, law enforcement. And I look at some of their training programs, particularly new recruits, and it always really struck me that they're always closer to hazing and testing than they are to teaching. And you look at how well people learn under stress, and often people need a bit of pressure, but when they're stressed, they often don't learn as well. And one of the things I've found is that there's often an absence of what you've been doing. There's an absence of role modeling how to do it. Role modeling how to do it with humility and self-review and that learning cycle. And I think this is quite a subtle way of improving learning in some of these organizations. What's your take on that?
Well, the hazing culture was definitely part of the military culture earlier on, is how I would just generalize it as earlier on. And the hazing piece has been very shut down to the maximum extent possible in that learning process. And there's still, though, I think, a need to pressurize because they're going to feel that pressure in the role that they're fulfilling. But that doesn't have to happen at the extent of the kind of the inappropriate hazing that used to occur. So yeah, the word hazing doesn't really have a productive role. I think there's people that would say, well, it's how you kind of welcome them in or try to put some sort of positive spin on hazing. I can even think, as I talk to you right now, like trying to think of a way to justify a part of it. But really, when you lump it into the word hazing, it just doesn't belong at all. And you need to still find ways to create that pressure. And there's plenty of ways to do that in a professional atmosphere that are completely relatable to the job and not just trying to show them that they're the new person.
Yeah, I agree entirely. Our training design for most of our programs involves setting up scenarios so that people can make mistakes. We won't tell them what the answer is. We want them to make enough mistakes that they can learn through making safe mistakes and get comfortable with making mistakes and learning through doing and improving. We could tell them an immaculate answer that they could parrot back to us, but that's testing their ability to remember what we've told them, not their ability to problem solve and learn through feedback. So we reverse it. They're often uncomfortable in the first few goes at it, and then they get used to it and go, actually, this is okay. I don't mind doing this. So it's a radically different way to learn. And in there, we're often looking for all sorts of signs that people have got the right kind of pressure, that they're responding okay. Also, we're really alert to red flags within teams and learning environments. Red flags that somebody's creating an environment that's not safe to learn in or not safe to operate in, whether that's in the front line, whether that's in a skiing setting. As another example, mountain safety. We're doing quite a lot of work with mountain safety at the moment. So I'm curious, what kind of red flags have you seen for behavior, either in individuals or an aggregate in culture? So there's two parts to that. One's individual behaviors, the other's group behaviors. What concerns you about safety? What have you seen?
The biggest red flag that comes immediately to mind with the individual is a bit of unpredictability. I can think of a pilot that was in a squadron that I was a part of that was very good most of the time. And then occasionally it just was like, who's this person that just did this really goofy thing? Goofy being this really unsafe act that was very uncomfortable for the person they were flying with or the people they were flying around. And that to me is the biggest red flag because it creates this kind of deviation from the way we normally operate in an unpredictable way that you can't really plan for, and it degrades confidence in that person. So that would be my biggest red flag that comes right to mind is the occasional unpredictable kind of random act of complete unsafe act.
I had a very recent experience working with somebody around having a conversation about risk, and I was managing their approach to risk, and I said that we have a different tolerance for risk. Yours is higher than mine, and that's the reason I'm putting in these mitigation measures. And he said, well, what is it exactly that's different? I'm surprised by that. And I said, 80% of the time, I think we're in furious agreement. There's no difference. 20% of the time, you do things that I wouldn't do. And that depends upon your state in those moments. And it really boils down to where his attention is and what his state is. If he's got a heightened state, hyper-focused, a bit too on, a bit too aggressive, he makes dumb choices, or he makes high-risk choices, or he does unpredictable behavior, or his attention goes one place and it needs to be somewhere else. And that's really interesting, because it's not that somebody can't manage risk or doesn't appreciate risk. When they're on their A game, they've got something really important to contribute, and they help my decision making enormously. And I always mitigate and check what is their state right now, and is it safe? Where is it? What's on it? So partly to lead you in here, for me personally, I find that having a range of reliable behaviors is important. Sometimes somebody who's a bit unpredictable, if you can harness that can actually help. It can help you be a little bit alert. If I reflect on team dynamics, I've recently come to the conclusion that the most dangerous red flags are passive aggressive. A little bit of humor, a little bit of quip. I'm sort of taking the mickey a little bit, but actually it undermines stuff. It's not truly supportive. It's passive aggressive, and that's probably the one for me.
Yeah. That's really bad for sure. Passive aggressive is just no fun to deal with. And going back to your question on the group, I can't think of a time where I've ever just walked into a group and thought, wow, this group is unsafe. You were mentioning earlier in one of the emails we shared about the culture in a group, and what can affect that culture. And I think that's more, when you go from an individual to a larger group or an organization, it's not going to be as simple to define as that person's passive aggressive or that person is unpredictable. It's going to be a number of things coming together that eats away at a group's ability to be safe. So the example that came to my mind when I thought about a group culture of safety is all the different things that go together to make that group being able to focus on not necessarily safety, but they're focused on doing their job well, which ends up in creating a safe environment. And on our last deployment, we got to see and found out that our sailors were not being paid correctly. There's an adjustment for when you're at sea, you're supposed to get extra money. That helps the families that are left behind be able to take care of themselves properly. And we as an organization had messed that up. And people are not going to be able to focus on doing their job well if they think that their families aren't being taken care of well at home. So it was something that had nothing to do necessarily with the culture of safety in the organization, but led to a distraction that was part of us not running our organization well, that didn't allow them to do their job in a focused way, which then I think starts to eat away at safety. So it became a very big priority to get that taken care of quickly, to let these sailors, men and women that we're working with, know that we care about them and we care about their families being taken care of, and we want to prioritize that so they can get back to doing their work.
I like this idea of tracking for whether people are really able to do their job well. And it reminded me of, and linking to that unpredictability, and it reminded me of a good friend and colleague, Gary Keane, a mountain guide based out of the US, heli skis out of Alaska mainly. And when he's leading a tour, he'll often take a group somewhere and he'll have a plan A and a plan B. Plan A is the magnificent ski line, the great snow, just exactly the best you're ever going to get for the day. But quite often that's got quite a lot of objective danger in it. And there's consequences in some of that sort of terrain, right? We all want to ski it, but of course that's the terrain that avalanches. It's often got crevasses, it's got drops, cliffs, everything about it. So what he'll often do is, with a new group, he'll take them to somewhere where there's a plan A, but he'll do a run first that gives him an option on a plan B, where plan B is just really safe. So the first thing he'll do is he'll tell people how he wants them to ski the slope. Those that are predictable and do their job well and do as they're told, he'll track it and go, yep, these guys are good, they can follow instructions, they're doing what I want. If anybody's showboating, not able to ski, not paying attention, stop below him rather than above him, or any of the behaviours that he's trying to mitigate, he'll go and ski plan B and he'll go, nah, they're not going to do what I want. They're not predictable enough that I can get them through this terrain safely. And I think that was a beautiful red flag from him. And I think there's something there that relates as well to this idea of distraction and systems. Have we got people that are distracted in life, or are they paying attention? Are they in the moment? So I think that was another red flag that you've identified. And in this case, yours was a system distraction, people not being paid. And I've certainly seen that before. I'm curious about the move into skiing now and backcountry touring, which is intrinsically high risk. If you're going to enjoy the good snow, you're going to be involved in managing risk. And you've got a different thing there where people don't have to be there. It's not their job, but they're choosing to be there. Doesn't make it any less risky. In fact, it often makes it more risky because you've not got professionals. You've not got people with that really top-level critical approach to debrief and risk. For you personally, what do you look for the people you go into the mountains with?
Ski tour partner is a really hard one, isn't it? It takes so many things to come together to make someone a good ski partner, and it has nothing to do with ski ability. It's all of the personal traits that make a good ski partner. Perhaps one of the most important is not being objective fixated. The ability to turn around and have it not be a bummer. To go for that plan B. So that's one of the most important ones to me, is that ability to turn around. And the other thing I found more important to me over time, as I've learned more myself, is someone that is willing to bring something to the conversation. Whether that's they looked at the Avi report themselves, they looked at the objective that we've talked about and kind of researched the route themselves. Well, while we're out ski touring, they are happy to share their observations with me in a productive way that helps us collectively have a better idea of the environment that we're moving through. So that piece definitely as well, just bringing something to the conversation so that I don't feel like I'm out there touring by myself. And then beyond that, of course, I want someone who's going to be a good, fun person to be around, good sense of humor, and willing to throw out some jokes, have a good beer at the end of the day. And then, we don't do this really well, I think, in recreational ski touring. Provide some feedback at the end of the day as well. We definitely don't. I don't as well spend as much time in the debrief phase in recreational adventure. And if it's a perfect day and it's just high fives and that's all it needs to be, then great. But if there are some things that went wrong, it's definitely worthwhile to talk about it. And that's another great piece, is to have that partner that can bring back some feedback and learn from it with you, and then bring it out to the mountain the next time you go ski touring together.
Yeah. I agree with all of those points. I like, got to be fun, got to be able to be participating. I'm always very cautious of passengers in the backcountry. They're switched off, they're having a good time, but they're just not thinking about anything. In which case, you're almost really acting as a professional guide. There's no team environment here. You're sort of strung out a little bit there, and you have to be a lot more cautious with folks that just are not switched on. Interesting, as you were reflecting there, something came to my mind that I found on occasion. I know a lot of very, very good leaders from all sorts of different domains, and one of the challenging things I've found in the past is where you're recreating, or you're in a high-risk environment with somebody who's a very good leader in one domain, but they're very much used to leading from the front. And when they have to be led or more sort of in a supporting role, they often find it really, really difficult. Even if they don't really know what they're doing, their habits are to lead anyway, and you spend a lot of your time trying to undo somebody who's desperate to be out front and calling the shots when they actually don't have the experience for it, or they're making really quite questionable decisions. They can only lead in one way. I found that to be quite challenging. Have you come across that before? Somebody who's they're desperate to lead, and you go, "Whoa, hang on a minute, what are you doing?"
Yeah, I think that person's me. I don't think it was to an extreme or to an uncomfortable extreme for sure, but I definitely like to be out front. I love to set a skin track. I love to just kind of think through the process. And I've been doing it long enough now where I feel confident in my skill sets, where I'm beyond the beginner stage for certain. But as I first got started, I think I was chomping too much at the bit to be out front, and wasn't always good at recognizing what my position actually was. And even recently, in the last few years, I still find myself having to really work at group involvement in decision making. Hey, how are you feeling about this? What do you think about this? And because a lot of times I will find myself very confident in the way we're going in the snowpack or in the skin track, and I have to make a very conscious effort to check in with the partners that I'm with to make sure that they feel the same way, because it may be an entirely different experience for them in that moment, and you won't know that unless you communicate with them. So yeah, I think I've been there myself in that example that you're talking about, and have had to really go through a learning process to be a better team member, not a leader. I think one of the best favorite sayings when it comes to leading is that the best leader, or the best way to lead, is by following. Let other people lead, and that makes them part of the group more. So, yeah, for sure, Ian.
Yeah, again, I've had a recent conversation with somebody who was struggling to lead in certain contexts or make decisions in certain contexts. And I worked it out that they were very, very good in the complicated domain when they were the expert and they knew the answers. In the complex domain, when they needed multiple inputs, they struggled because they try and come up with the answer rather than say, hey, there are 10 different answers right now. What's everybody seeing? Let's make the best choice here with what we can see right now. And that was a big learning for him. It was a really interesting shift in that dynamic. And I think, so just reflecting, I think it was my awareness of the context and the different states that he had in different contexts that helped us resolve that. And I'm not reflecting on what you said, that, hey, I used to be that guy, sometimes my tendency is to want to get out front. But you've also sort of moderated that, and you're now checking in a lot more. Did you do that reasonably early on? Did you recognize that in yourself fairly early on, or did something have to sort of get quite critical before you woke up to that? What did you calibrate from others?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I learned it early on. I definitely think I recognized that a little bit later than perhaps I would have preferred. In the last 6 years working in test aviation, I've really had to learn that a lot more. I know we were talking about ski tour, and I'll bring it back to that point, but what I didn't recognize in the engineering world is that engineers are, and I don't say this to be offensive or assumptive, but a lot of engineers are very introverted. They're incredible people, and they're very good at what they do, but they're not as likely to speak out, even if they know more than you on the topic. So in that environment, I think I learned a lot more about reaching out for feedback, or coming into the room and not trying to lead from the start, but pull other people to be leading that discussion, because they definitely were, or they might be the expert in the room. As that relates to the skiing piece, I think one of the biggest pivots that happened to me was in a group environment where we had a larger group, which can be very bad. Doesn't have to be bad, but it definitely becomes harder to control all the dynamics of different people. So I think our group size was about 7, but the group size, or the group, was filled with these incredibly accomplished people. And we had one person in the group that was sort of leading that group on a route that they were familiar with that day. And none of us, I just think, gelled at the start of the day to recognize that we were a group, and that we had to kind of flex to perhaps a conservative opinion in the group that didn't go to somebody else's comfort level. And in that dynamic, it wasn't in that one that I was trying to be a leader, but I definitely, towards the end of the day, I just decided to take a leader role to get us out of a spot that I was uncomfortable with, and I didn't handle it very well. I just was like, there's all this back and forth going on. It makes me very uncomfortable to, we're going, we're not going, we're going, we're not going. Let's do that. No, let's do this. And finally, I was like, look, does anyone violently object to me doing this and going this way? No? Waited? Okay. And then we exited, and we all got out safely. But I don't think it was a really enjoyable day for a lot of us. And a lot of us look back on that experience like, what happened there? And that was a time where I think I was trying to make a decision that I felt I had to make, get out in front and be a leader. But I didn't do a good job of group dynamics, listening to what other people had to say, and certainly could have held it better. And it made me think about it I noodled through that one for about 2 years. Before I kind of felt like I had got a decent answer that made me comfortable that I had learned what I was supposed to learn.
Yeah, isn't that key? We mull over for 2 years an incident that wasn't a critical incident. No one got hurt.
Right.
It's just poor decision making, but you ruminated on it for 2 years before you let it go. And I'm going to pull you right back into it now.
Okay, fair enough.
And I want you to go. There's the incident you found yourself in that you had to get yourself out of, and you stepped up and you said, hey, look, I think does anybody violently object if I go this way? And they didn't. But long before that, there were signals, weak signals. Something alerted you. The first weak signal for me, which is not such a weak signal, is 7 people. 3 or 4 is a good number. Any more than 3 or 4, you really need to split up. That's something I've learned in ski touring. But apart from that, what was the earliest thing that you saw or felt? How early in the day did you go, this isn't gelling? How soon was it?
It started when we ripped the skins and started on this descent. And ironically enough, I think the run was something like Endless Smiles or, Forever Happy or something like that. And, it didn't turn out to be that kind of day. But we started to ski down. So on the descent, we partnered up into smaller groups. We weren't just kind of mobbing the mountain. But I watched as we started to descend, we weren't really keeping in touch with one another on the descent. So that I feel at times we were descending together in our little groups, but not really watching out for one another. So right there is where I felt like we had parted ways with good practice. And then where it really came apart was we got to a point where one person in the group said, I'm not comfortable with this, going down any lower, and stopped and was in the process of putting skins back on to go up. And they didn't want to go to valley bottom. To me, that was like, all right, cool. We're done going down. Let's go up. And then we had people like, well, let me just poke out over this spot here. And another person kind of like, I'm just going to go look over here. And they actually went out of eyesight, and just all the red flags. It's like, man, I am really uncomfortable now. So yeah, I went from that initial descent piece to someone saying, I'm not comfortable, let's turn back. And that not being just like an instant, cool, we're all turning back. And I think we could have handled even that better. The people that were wanting to continue on, I think they would have been making a safe decision had they decided to continue. And it was well within their skill sets to manage the challenges that were below them. But we just didn't talk about doing that.
Yeah. So really not great communication, not great team cohesion, and began at the top and then exacerbated by the time people got to the bottom. Yeah, I mean, great example. It's exactly the sort of patterns to look for in culture and team dynamic. And interestingly, my strong belief is that those are the times to be able to get it back on track rather than much later. Once those dynamics get established, it's much harder to redirect and nudge it back.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, it's a great inroad for when you talked about a group safety issue. It's probably being overused at this point, but that normalization of deviance, where you kind of slowly erode away at what the minimum acceptable is until you get to a point where, you just set yourself up for catastrophic failure.
Yeah. So as we're talking about this sort of culture now and these sorts of dynamics and red flags, I wonder if there are any aspects of culture anywhere in your life that you're encouraging more of or encouraging less of. What would that be?
Well, I have an answer. I'm not sure it's directly to your question. It's kind of blended into one of the comments you put earlier in an email about something we might talk about, an area we need to focus on, perhaps in leadership. And the thing I think I experienced the most the past 6 years, exiting the Navy and being in a very different role in life, is kind of this male-dominated leadership role, where the majority of the people in leadership roles that I've worked with, it's these white, middle-aged, middle-class, upper-middle-class men, me. But in this case, I wasn't in the leadership role. And you see a lot of bias and tendency there that I don't think is healthy. And I really think that's an area that could use a lot of evolution. And I don't know what the path is to that, but I think of that, and I did think of what we just saw recently with the interview, right? And you made a comment on that one with was it the Prime Minister of New Zealand and Finland? Yeah, and kind of what you saw going on there to these two amazing leaders being characterized by their gender in a question. So that's something I'm trying to learn more about and trying to understand better and roll into that culture that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Broadening now from culture, if you could direct people's attention to something important in the world, what would it be?
I think it goes back to what we were just talking about, some of the imbalance that we're seeing right now in leadership roles. I find it very uneasy that you've got people that are, and I'm not trying to be political about this, but I watch a presidential candidate call and ask for a pause on our Constitution, and sitting down with people that are overt racists, and somehow that's still normalized in the media. Like I think that's very concerning and should be globally focused on in order to ensure that our humanity is still tracking in the right direction. Don't know if that is a usable answer, but
again, as I'm tracking for patterns from the beginning of our interview through to the end, what are some of the recurring patterns? What are some of the salient points that I could summarize? And it's this. You began by talking about the influential role of your mum, inspiring you to a couple of things. There was hard work, but also being aware of the sensitive side, feelings, emotions, and what's important. You've developed empathy with a struggling single mum, in a male-dominated society, setting up her own business. You learnt something there about role modeling, how she role modeled with you, and then you've been role modeling. And that role modeling cascaded all the way through our interview and your business, your professional life. Role modeling the humility to be able to take on feedback, role modeling the ability to go, I didn't get this right. I mean, you spent 2 years pondering about your learnings as a leader from a recreational ski trip, and then taking that back into even in the recreational setting, having a debrief, if it's a high five, things went well, all the way through to, hey, maybe things didn't go so well, what can we learn from this? And I think right the way through, there's this awareness of yourself, like me, white, male, privileged, leading, and our own biases. And then what that means for leadership, what that means for culture, And you just wrapped up nicely there by saying, the one thing is, let's check on that. Let's be aware of that. So there's a lot of coherent patterns that relate to the way that you've got experiences around safety and culture. I mean, we put it through the lens of safety because that's a nice, for me, it makes things real. It adds a pressure, particularly in the sorts of things that we do, the things that you've done. If you don't get that right, people die. So it brings that lens, and your parting message there was for really questioning that male-dominated leadership and bias, and the direction for humanity. And I've got one final question for you, which is, what are your future aspirations, work or elsewhere in life?
Yeah, well, I'm right in the middle of this big transition that is really exciting because I'm exiting out of 26 years of Navy and government full-time employment and going on this different path with being a pilot for this light flight organization. So future aspirations are starting at home here, just focusing on seeing how to be a better partner for my wife and staying a good father for my son. Really getting more involved locally. Where I live, it's a very small, sparsely populated community in the edge of Death Valley. But there's a lot of really amazing things to do in this area, and obviously, just like anywhere, a lot of amazing people. So I'm trying to blend my aviation passion with this nonprofit that we just started that is working on trying to develop the local airport and not just make it about aviation, but a hub for the community. And so it's my first chance to really be able to do something, an activity where I'm focused a little bit more. I've got time to focus on community if I can pitch back in. So that, I think, is something I'm really looking forward to being a part of.
Mm-hmm. So important. The key to veteran transition is sense of purpose. What's my new sense of purpose? What's my new mission? You've got a transition into civilian work, but also, team and community. And I'm sure that's part of some of your unconscious early motivations for joining the military is around that teamwork and connections and having that identity. And I love the way that you're transitioning there to become more involved in your local community. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks for today's interview. I'm really happy with the material we've covered. It's really, really interesting. Lots of insights.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed sitting and talking with you. And hopefully look forward to talking with you some more in the future.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Salience Podcast. Please leave us a review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to the Frontline Mind newsletter by visiting our website at frontlinemind.com. Have you got a topic you would like some more salience on? Send us a message on LinkedIn or email team@frontlinemind.com.